Hey, what's going on, guys? So I know we talk a lot about diaphragmatic breathing, right? We talk about it because it's very important for the brain, oxygen, glucose. Yesterday we had Pat Marquez here from Neuroathlete, and he went over a guy named George Catlin. Who is that? So George Catlin was a lawyer in New York who eventually got sick of his job and started doing painting. So he started painting a lot of aristocrats in New York on the east side and all that stuff, because back in the 1830s, that's where everybody pretty much lived. The West really wasn't settled yet. So he got really sick and tired of that and started going out to the West and living with a lot of Native American tribes. And what he would notice is there was hardly any disease. He would notice that their teeth were straight, white, and they kept their teeth into their elderly ages. And there's hardly any infant mortality rate as well. And he was going through and he was painting all these tribes. And finally, one thing that his aha moment that he noticed was that all of them pretty much were nasal breathers. Even in infancy, if you ever see a Native American cradle, they are strapped in and their heads tilted just a little bit, not cranked down, but a little bit tilted. And when the babies would sleep, the warriors would come over and they would push the lips shut. So that way they would train them to breathe through their nose and be a big diaphragmatic breather. And then in the Native American tribes, they thought that being a nasal breather and being a mouth breather would make you weak, and it would sap your strength, and it would make you, in a sense, more fatigued. And years later, we find out that that's actually the case. Also, when you're a nasal breather like that, your tongue position sits higher, and it pushes against the roof of your mouth more than sits at the bottom. So that could be one of the reasons why they kept their teeth for so long, right? Other than there's probably other reasons for that as well, but he noticed that was a big one. And back in the 1830s, 40s, people only lived until they were about 30 or 40. So George Catlin started adopting this and started adopting breathing through his nose most of the time. And he noticed that he started feeling better than ever, and he eventually ended up living to his 70s. Now, can you credit all that to nasal breathing? Maybe, maybe not, but it's definitely strong correlation. And what we noticed going through all these videos and everything, that every time that we add the diaphragm and we start to expand and use that, core function goes way up. Again, the brain's number one fuel sources are oxygen and glucose, so brain function definitely gets better. That's been scientifically proven over and over again. So that's why this video is titled Breathe Like a Warrior, because a lot of the Native American tribes, South American tribes, all of them adapted this mentality of having their mouth closed most of the time and breathing through the nose to get that deep diaphragmatic breath, expanding the lower lungs, because there's a mechanical function to breathing, because your lungs just don't breathe on their own, right? The lungs just don't expand and contract. You have muscles that do that, right? And you see here, right, one of the big primary ones is this parachute muscle called your diaphragm, right? And when that contracts, it drops down, and when you breathe out, it contracts back up, right? Or it stretches up. So if you have this function here, you cannot bring that breath all the way down to those lower lobes. And that also helps, as we talked about in the course, with sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system function, right? And we notice a lot with TBIs is that can also affect how you're breathing, because that is a brainstem function. So if you get an injury to your brainstem, you will be what they call a sympathetic breather, breathing up very shallowly in the upper chest versus being able to bring that breath all the way down into the lower lobes of the lungs. So nitrous oxide, so you see the pills and all that stuff that helps arterial blood flow, oxygen, glucose, all that. One of the primary stimulators for that is nasal breathing, right? So being able to have your mouth closed through the day, breathing in your nose will help stimulate more NO2 in your bloodstream.